BJ Mafia was poppin'. Jags fans, free agency negotiations and legal tampering officially began today at noon Eastern. Trent Baalke may not have cooked a full course meal yet, but nonetheless, I am very pleased with the work that he's been doing so far. It is currently 3:30 p.m. Eastern as I'm recording this video. So if there's any other breaking news in between this video from the time that I've recorded it, edited it, published it, and you guys are now watching it, I apologize. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. But in these 3.5 hours, I've been pleased with the work he's been doing, because if you remember last offseason, in free agency period, the Jaguars were conservative and complacent. D'Ernest Johnson, whom I have a lot of respect for, was our biggest signing. And Trent Baalke's actually being assertive this offseason so far and making some great moves. Jags fans, before I actually go ahead and start talking about the free agents that we've retained and now signed onto the team, if you guys appreciate the work that I do and you enjoy this type of content, make sure you guys go ahead and drop me a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe bell to stay tuned for more Jaguars content that I do here on YouTube. And make sure you guys also go ahead and follow me on my socials, especially on Twitter. I'm very active and I'm on there every single day. The link tree will be in the description down below so that you guys can go ahead and check that out. But Jags fans, let's actually go ahead and talk about our free agency period so far and do a little bit of a recap. Now, Daniel Thomas and Ezra Cleveland were two guys that we retained back onto the roster. And Daniel Thomas came back on a 2-year, $6 million contract. $4 million of that was guaranteed. I like that signing. He was a late round pick back in 2020 from Auburn. And Daniel Thomas, for anybody that's met him, super humble guy, great guy to be around, very charismatic, and obviously he's a great player, especially on special teams. He's going to make an impact, and I'm very happy to have Daniel Thomas back. Now with Ezra Cleveland, he was retained on a 3-year, $24 million contract. $14.25 million of that wasn't guaranteed money, and I expected the Jaguars to re-sign him, and I'm grateful that they did. You solidify that offensive line, you continue to fortify that, and make sure your franchise quarterback is well protected. And now you've got depth pieces. We'll get into Mitch Morse here in a moment, but Ezra Cleveland, I really like that signing. Now the Jaguars also restructured the contract of Brandon Sheriff, our right guard, which is going to save us $5 million on the cap this season. Now let's go ahead and talk about the 4 guys that we've now signed onto the roster so far that's brand new that I currently have it here at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Let's start with kicker from the Denver Broncos, Will Lutz, because the Jaguars, since Josh Lambo, have been searching for a kicker and they have not found their answer. Last season it was Brandon McManus. The season prior it was Riley Patterson. And the time in between I've completely forgot, because that's how many kickers we've had. The Jaguars may have found their answer with Will Lutz on a 3-year contract. He had a 1-year stint last year in 2023 with Denver. All of those years prior, he was obviously kicking with New Orleans. And Will Lutz has been a very solid kicker throughout the majority of his career. And last year in Denver, he made 30 of 34 field goal attempts, 29 of 31 extra point attempts. Hopefully the Jaguars have finally figured that position out and the Jaguars can have their kicker of the future. Now, like I briefly mentioned earlier, let's talk about another signing for the Jaguars. Mitch Morse, center from the Buffalo Bills, is now coming over to the Jaguars, and he's going to be replacing Luke Fortner. Thank goodness. Mitch Morse signed a 2-year, $10.5 million deal, $7 million of that in guaranteed money, and that is a phenomenal team-friendly contract. You get a guy who's a little bit on the older side, 32 years of age, but a proven vet in this league, an average to an above average center, a guy who's been a Pro Bowler, a guy who has a ton of playoff experience from his time in Kansas City and his time with the Buffalo Bills, and now he's going to be coming over as the replacement for Luke Fortner. When you compare their numbers last season, Mitch Morse, in 730 pass blocking snaps, allowed 31 quarterback pressures and just 1 sack. And Luke Fortner last season, in 749 pass blocking snaps, allowed 28 quarterback pressures, 3 QB hits, and 4 sacks. That is not going to get the job done, especially when you have your young franchise quarterback, who did get banged up last season, all over the place from a concussion, a knee, an ankle, you name it. You cannot have the interior offensive line playing that poor, especially when there's little to no chemistry and continuity, consistently switching guys out. Anybody, including myself, is an upgrade from Luke Fortner at the center position, and I'm grateful that we're getting a guy in here who is a proven vet. Now, I will say, for the record, I don't believe that this signing of Mitch Morse means that the Jaguars won't target a center or a guard in the first 4 rounds of the draft. They probably still want somebody in case of injury on the offensive line to have for depth pieces, but also they probably want a succession plan that could eventually fill into that center position next season or 2 seasons down the line if Luke Fortner does not continue to progress behind Mitch Morse. But now you have a very solidified offensive line. You've got 2 great tackles in Cam Robinson and an Anton Harrison. You bring back Ezra Cleveland. You've now got Mitch Morse and you've got Brandon Sheriff at right guard. And now you've got great depth pieces as of right now with Luke Fortner as your backup center and with Walker Little, guys who've all taken a lot of snaps at the next level. I feel very good about where the offensive line is as of right now. Now getting into the third free agent that the Jaguars have signed, another Buffalo Bills player, former UCF legend, back in the 2020 draft from the Buffalo Bills, Gabriel Davis. I called this one. If you watched my video a couple of days ago, I talked about 5 free agents that the Jaguars should sign, and Gabe Davis was one of them. This is a guy, to me, who's going to be on that Christian Kirk hierarchy, and I am so excited about the job that Trent Baalke has done getting Gabe Davis here, and I think he's going to be a great receiver on the opposite side of Zay Jones, maybe Calvin Ridley, maybe T. Higgins, maybe Brian Thomas Jr., I don't know. But Gabe Davis signed a 3-year deal, $50 million, $39 million of it was guaranteed money. And Gabe Davis is, like I said, going to be on that Christian Kirk hierarchy where you've seen talent, you've seen the flashes, and you know he has the capabilities of being a great wide receiver 2 because he's not a wide receiver 1, but he's never eclipsed 1,000 yards in a season. He was playing opposite side Stephon Diggs, but now he's going to come to Jacksonville. He's going to have a quarterback that's going to believe and trust in him. Not saying that Josh Allen didn't, but the Jaguars are going to make Gabe Davis play above his contract, and he's going to exceed that at 24, 25 years of age. Gabe Davis, this is a very good signing. I am excited about getting this guy here to Jacksonville. And take a look at what he did last year in Buffalo for the Bills. 78 targets, 45 receptions, 746 yards, 7 touchdowns in just 4 drops. Gabe Davis also had a 50% contested catch rate when targeted and also an 87.9 NFL passer rating when targeted this past season. Gabe Davis, like I said, I'm extremely excited for him. This is a vertical deep threat that can really help open up that part of the field for the Jaguars, take the top off of a defense, and that still allows whoever you want on the outside to play opposite side of him. That allows Christian Kirk to be in the slot still, and you still have other dynamic playmakers on your team like Evan Ingram, like Travis Etienne. I'm very excited to have Gabriel Davis here in Jacksonville. Now getting into the last signing so far for the Jaguars, we got Darnell Savage, safety from the Green Bay Packers, former first-round pick back in 2019 from the University of Memphis, former Tiger. I am excited about this deal the way I am about Gabriel Davis. I really wanted Chauncey Gardner-Johnson or Darnell Savage here because the Jaguars desperately needed a guy who could play at a multitude of positions. Darnell Savage is a guy you can play at free safety, you can drop him down in the box, you can play him at nickel, and the Jaguars can line this guy up all over the field. Now, the terms of his contract have not been figured out yet to my knowledge. As of right now, I do know that it's a 3-year deal, but let's take a look at what Darnell Savage did last season for the Green Bay Packers. In 558 defensive snaps, he had 40 tackles, 16 times he was targeted in coverage. He did allow 13 receptions, but he had a 96.1 NFL passer rating when targeted in coverage. And like I said, this is a guy who's extremely athletic, very versatile, will play all over the field, and I think he's going to fit perfectly into this Ryan Nielsen system. They're going to throw a lot of different packages and a lot of different coverages at you, and Darnell Savage has those athletic capabilities to really be moved all around the field. And if you remember this past year in the wild card round versus the Dallas Cowboys, he did have that pick 6 on Dak Prescott. That was a hell of a play, and of course I always love seeing the Dallas Cowboys lose in the postseason every year. Now, I do briefly want to talk about Calvin Ridley, and before I get into him, I will say Mitch Morse and Gabe Davis, both of those guys left Buffalo because they wanted to come to Jacksonville and play with the real Josh Allen. Let me just make that very clear. But let me briefly talk about Calvin Ridley because as of right now, what it's reported from Peter Schrager on Good Morning Football, Gabe Davis signing in Jacksonville does not mean that Calvin Ridley is necessarily gone. They're still very much in those conversations, according to his sources, which honestly, that kind of surprises me because I would think that Gabe Davis, who I've already mentioned is not a wide receiver 1, is probably going to be the Zay Jones replacement. You keep Christian Kirk in the slot, and that means that you're probably going to go out there and try to target a T. Higgins or a guy like a Brian Thomas Jr., a Donnie Mitchell in the draft. Any one of those guys that you think could potentially be your number 1, that's who I would expect the Jaguars to go out there and make a move for. I'm not necessarily upset with the fact that Gabe Davis is here. The Jaguars are still trying to figure out how to get Calvin Ridley retained because I've been on the record, I've been saying it, and I'm continuing to say it. I want Calvin Ridley back here in Jacksonville. I would love to have Calvin Ridley, Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk, and that probably means Zay Jones is out the door. Right? That is a legitimate core that I know that we can build around. Is it an expensive wide receiver room? Yes, it is. Should you get younger and cheaper in that room and potentially get a guy in the first or second round, even if you want to get a Keon Coleman or a Ricky Pearsall, you probably should go a younger route. But nonetheless, the Jaguars still need to go out there and make one more big wide receiver move. I hope it's Calvin Ridley. I would love if it's T. Higgins. Nonetheless, the Jaguars still need to do something right there. Jags fans, I do want to know if you guys still think that Calvin Ridley will be retained, because if he is, then that means that the Jaguars don't have to give up their second round pick now that the league year has begun, which means that we're going to be saving ourselves that pick, thankfully. But Jags fans, I did not want to be too long-winded with this video. I just wanted to get through it as soon as I possibly could. Jags fans, what do you guys make about today's signing so far? And I'm going to keep you guys as updated as I possibly can when it comes to our entire free agency negotiation period. Jags fans, if you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure you guys go ahead and drop me a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe bell to stay tuned for more Jags content that I do here on YouTube. And make sure you guys also go ahead and follow me on my socials, especially on Twitter. I'm very active and I'm on there every single day. But Jags fans, thanks again for sticking around throughout the whole video. Brett James, aka BJ, I'm out, y'all. And like always, let's go Jags.